Nichols.
Good morning. Sharks and Hanukkah, that's a tough act to follow. I will tell you though, I find it pretty humorous because if you'll see, the title of my book is Passage to Nirvana, A Survivor's Zen Voyage. And I am a Christian, but I'm also practicing Zen Buddhist, and I was sitting there thinking, boy, they think they have it bad. You ever heard a good Buddhist holiday song? That's it. Anyway. Yeah, so I was a writer, and 8 years ago I was standing in a car wash. I've done all these crazy things. I've jumped off cliffs on skis. I've sailed across oceans. But I was standing in a car wash, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital a few days later. I had been hit by a car. I'd fallen, hit my head on the pavement, and I suffered what's called a traumatic brain injury. And a traumatic brain injury, you may have heard of it. It's in the news a lot these days because a lot of the soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan are suffering traumatic brain injuries from roadside bomb blasts and that sort of thing. And also a lot of athletes are suffering traumatic brain injuries. And I've been an athlete my whole life. When I was at Nichols, I was co-captain of the ski team, co-captain of the lacrosse team. I was on the lacrosse team with Mr. Franz. I'll embarrass him by telling you that. And so I'm very aware and cognizant of traumatic brain injuries in terms of athletics and sports. And I know one of the great things about Nichols is that it's very big on athletics. Anyway, so when I was here at Nichols, just for those of you that are wondering how I got to this point, my junior year I had to go to summer school. I almost got thrown out. So those of you that are struggling with whatever it is, just hang in there and keep putting one foot in front of the other because you never know what will happen. And that's part of my story here, is that after I was hit by a car and I was in a coma and took 8 years to really regain my sense of my brain and who I was, is that idea of perseverance, of just keep putting one foot in front of the other and just keep doing whatever you need to do, because eventually, my senior year, I ended up getting the Headmaster's Award, which was thanks to that idea of just keep on going, keep on doing it, whatever happens. And I had the support of a lot of good teachers. The book is the acknowledgments in the book. There are several of my English teachers that I acknowledge has really helped me. So you never know what you're learning now, how it will end up. I know I'm really old to you guys, but here I am 30 years later. And what I learned at Nichols from my teachers has stood me in good stead until today. I was intrigued by some of the announcements. For example, all the announcements about texting and driving and what that can do to you. The announcements about how that vending machines kill more people than sharks. I'm still marveling over that one. And one of the things that I was thinking while I heard that is that, yes, these things can kill people, but there's a whole range of things in between where you can have bad things happen to you, like head injury. Texting and driving, if you're in a car accident, you might not get killed, but you might get a pretty good bang on the head. If a vending machine falls on you, you might not get killed, but you might have a traumatic brain injury. And I love the fact that the school is starting a support group for people that have been through traumatic events in their families. That's a really great thing, because it happens to a lot more people than you would realize. And it happened to my family in spades. Not only did I have a traumatic brain injury, but my mother had one 9 months before me and died. My brother-in-law was dying of cancer about the same time. We had a lot of trauma in our family. And one of the things that I know Nichols is big on as well is community service, which is a wonderful thing. And this book is my way of doing community service. I'm a writer. So when I was finally able and well enough to write again, I thought, well, what can I do? Well, how can I help people with traumatic brain injuries, people who have family members who have suffered traumatic brain injuries? How can I help the general public understand more about traumatic brain injuries? You may have heard me yesterday or driving on your way to school. I was on the NPR station yesterday doing an interview. I was in the Buffalo News a few weeks ago, and I've been in other media outlets around the country. And that's my crusade. That's what I'm doing, is kind of getting the word out about traumatic brain injury and how to prevent it, how to treat it, how to take care of people with traumatic brain injury. And I'm doing it all through this book that I've written, which is called Passage to Nirvana, A Survivor's Zen Voyage, Reflections on Loss, Discovery, Healing, and Hope. And those last parts are the important parts, the healing, the hope, the discovery. So I'm just going to read you a quick excerpt from the book. Why don't we switch that? This is a chapter called Warriors. And I wrote this book partly because I befriended a young Marine who had come back from Iraq who had a traumatic brain injury. And he's a warrior. But he and I were talking about what it's like to be a young man and all the crazy things that young men do, and young women do too. And it got me thinking about just how we act when we're young and what that can do to us. So I'm going to read you this little short excerpt. The cumulative effect of head injuries is something that is just beginning to be understood due to the high prevalence of multiple concussions among professional football players. These giant, seemingly invincible warriors being laid low in alarming numbers by an invisible malady, recurring concussions and head injuries that often leave them with dementia and cognitive decline as they age long after they leave the sport. I've often wondered how much the severity of my own symptoms was caused by previous incidents. When I was 10 years old, I was riding my bike down a steep hill near our house when I caught a wheel on some gravel and went flying. I was found by a neighbor who was a doctor who cleaned my cuts and then took me home so my mother could take me to the hospital, where they further cleaned my bloody raw skin, applied ointment, and wrapped my arm and leg in gauze. I don't remember any specific head injury, but in those days no one wore helmets, and medical professionals were not as sensitive to the possibility of concussions, so I wouldn't be surprised if any bump on the head would have been dismissed as nothing to worry about. Another time, at roughly the same age, I was skiing with some friends, and we used shovels to be able to jump on the ski hill out of snow. We had been watching the Winter Olympics and didn't understand that Olympic ski jumpers used a different type of binding where the heel lifts free so they can lean forward. We built our little jump in a place where the run-in was steep, but the landing was flat, icy, and hard. I took the first crack at the jump, went flying in the air, couldn't lean forward, and came down with a loud thud on my back, neck, and head. No helmet, of course. Nobody wore helmets then. I lay there, seeing stars, unable to move. My friends gathered around me, not knowing what to do, until an adult skied up, asked what was going on, and finally helped me to my feet. Again, no one was worried about head injuries or concussions. I was a typical, energetic, rambunctious boy. Another time I fell water skiing and nearly knocked myself out when my head hit the ski. Another time I was playing varsity football as a defensive end and tried to tackle the quarterback as he was throwing a pass. The tip of the football went full force into the bridge of my nose, breaking my nose and causing me to see stars again. Another time I was playing lacrosse and was blindsided by a defenseman. My head hit the ground, and even though I was wearing a helmet, I couldn't get up for several minutes. Did the coaches or myself or anyone else worry about a concussion? No. Both times I was sent back into the game after a few minutes. As an adult, although I was supposedly smarter and more mature, you guys know it's not really true about adults, right? You learned that about your parents? Yes. There were still a few times when I fell skiing and hit my head, or smacked my head on the boom when sailing, or banged my head under the sink while trying to fix a leaking faucet, cursing and sporting an ugly egg-shaped bruise for days afterwards. How many of those times had I imperceptibly damaged my brain? Adding to the cumulative effects of repeated minor brain trauma, how many of those incidents contributed to my continuing problems with cognition after the accident? Because of the research being done on professional football players and other athletes, we now know that the cumulative effects of multiple head injuries can be devastating. You just have to look at Muhammad Ali to know this sad truth. And I don't know how many of you know who Muhammad Ali is, but he was the world's greatest boxer at one time, and he's been hit in the head so many times that now he can barely walk or talk. So what do we do about this problem? Do we ban violent sports, especially for kids? Or do we get smarter about how we play those sports, about what kind of equipment we use, about protecting our precious brains? And that's about sports, but it's true about driving and texting. Now, I don't expect anybody to be wearing a helmet while they're driving, but you can definitely stop texting. And I would just encourage all of you, there's a lot more awareness now. There's a woman that wrote me, she started a foundation out in San Diego because her son was playing lacrosse. He was a senior in high school, was playing lacrosse and suffered a traumatic brain injury and was very seriously injured. So she's started a movement to make people more aware, and coaches are more aware, and having athletic trainers and that sort of thing. Anyway, so I'll just close by showing you that community service can reach far, far and wide. You know, there's your Nichols community, there's the Buffalo community, or if you live in the South Towns, the South Towns community. There's a community of traumatic brain injury survivors. There's a worldwide community, a community of people in the US. And since I published the book just a few months ago, I've gotten just tons of emails and postings on my Facebook page. The Facebook fan page, this is amazing for those of you who are into the internet. The Facebook fan page already has fans from the US, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Argentina, Bolivia, England, Ireland, France, Italy, Croatia, Russia, Poland, Vietnam, Morocco, India, Nepal, South Africa, Australia, Indonesia, Japan, and probably a few that I've forgotten, because this problem of traumatic brain injury is worldwide, and it's really struck a nerve. So I'm just going to leave you with a couple just quick emails that I've gotten from people, excerpts from emails I've gotten from people. It's part of being a traumatic brain injury survivor. Sometimes my brain doesn't always work well enough to let me talk properly. Anyway. Passage to Nirvana spoke to me from TBI, Zen, family, and more. It took my heart away. Thanks for writing it. That was from a man I met who, his son had suffered a traumatic brain injury, and his son was having emotional problems and difficulties, and the father didn't know what to do, and he just was sort of so sad that he was having trouble connecting and understanding his son. Beautifully done. Thank you for being able to tell our TBI survivor's story. I will be buying lots of copies to give as thank yous to my massive medical team. That's from a woman that I've never met from Syracuse who's been sending me emails. She was in a serious accident a few years ago and suffers from a traumatic brain injury. Another one, I finished reading last night. It took a lot to get me in tears, but you did that. My sister had a horrible brain aneurysm in 2001. Throughout your book, I kept thinking about my sister. 9 years later, I still struggle with visiting her. She can't talk or write. A lot of your insights may help me relate to her. So again, there's a family member. And finally, this one, which I really love. And I love this one because this is from an old teacher of mine at Nichols who hasn't taught here in a long time, and she's retired and now lives on the West Coast, but she heard about the book. And she sent me this email. Passage to Nirvana feels clean in its clarity and its openness. In spite of all you went through, you managed to write a book that is positive and uplifting. The contents are the color of the sky and the ocean. Even people who have never had physical or emotional stress on that level need to read Passage to Nirvana. So thank you very much. I'm going to be around. I'm going to be teaching some classes, and we don't have much time in the morning to talk about the writing aspect of the book and the creativity aspect of the book, but that's a whole other part. And if anybody has any questions about traumatic brain injury or writing or creativity or any of those great things, or skiing, what it's like to ski all over the world and get paid for it, feel free to seek me out. I'll be around. So thanks a lot.